Good afternoon, and welcome to the Mosaic Human Capital Lunch and Learn series, a chance for business owners and operators to learn tips for filling the hiring gap in this tight labor market. Our aim is to bring practical discussion to the issues we're seeing in the talent acquisition marketplace. The premise of this series is to offer practical guidance to mid-market company leadership on how to fill the gaps we see in the talent acquisition practices today. I'm Colette Kernigan, Director of Business Development for Mosaic Human Capital Solutions, a professional services company focused on delivering human resource solutions to client companies. In addition to maintaining an HR consulting book of business, Mosaic Human Capital offers fractional HR services, turnkey startup support, and we are quite active and effective in the talent acquisition and retention space. With me is Mosaic founder Henry Martinez, former Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Valero Energy Corporation and CST Brands, as well as Luke Sessler, Mosaic Director of Operations. Guys, welcome.
Thanks, Colette. Thank you for facilitating this for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Henry, so on the last episode of Filling the Hiring Gap, we shared a general overview, mentioning that today's episode will cover applicant tracking systems. So what can listeners expect to gain in the next 30 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for all of you that have come back, that caught the very first episode and are here for this first little bit deeper dive. I think consistent with our first conversation is just a reminder, we are middle market focused as a practice. And so we do like to speak directly to middle market owners and operators. And so in that particular, from that perspective, in our practice, part of the gap that we feel like we're trying to address is frankly the gap that exists in the middle market space when it comes to talent acquisition in terms of technology and applicant tracking systems. And so what we're hoping to do and to accomplish is for anyone that's not an HR professional, that doesn't quite always live in the technology platforms day to day, can gain a little bit of insight into what an applicant tracking system is, an ATS, on what the marketplace is, what are the dynamics in the market that are driving the need for this type of technology. And to the extent somebody doesn't have it and they want it, how should they frame their thoughts around going to market, to get an RFP. And, the last thing I'll mention too, because I know we have a lot of practitioners, HR practitioners listening to this series. And, for them, yes, I need to clarify there are companies that do not have applicant tracking systems, right? Because they've been around a long time. But even for those that have them, there is still quite a bit of a gap with companies that have the technology, but then don't utilize the technology to its fullest capability. So there are still applicable nuggets, if you will, for that population that might have the technology, but not, again, utilizing it to the best of their abilities.
Okay, thank you, Henry. So let's start at the beginning. What is an applicant tracking system?
Absolutely, I can take that one. So an applicant tracking system, also known as an ATS, at its core, it's an electronic platform used by companies to manage their internal hiring process. It's a usually single sign-on. Multiple people can log into it, and it's a way to collaborate and manage the hiring process. And really, these types of systems began to gain popularity in the 90s when internet-based recruiting really started to emerge. And as everyone can imagine, since then, it's really just kind of taken off from there. Hasn't changed a whole lot other than they've become nicer to look at and added some more features, texting, different things like that. But but yeah, at the end of the day, it's just a way for companies to manage their internal process and become more efficient.
Okay. And so, why is an ATS important? And I think what you're saying necessary.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, two things. Number one, we mentioned in the first series or the first discussion, we know labor has a downward trend at a macro level. There are fewer people to go to work, and that is why the labor market is so tight, and it's going to stay tight. The pandemic accelerated this phenomenon, and that's why everyone is so massively understaffed at the moment. So at the end of the day, it's the market that's, I think, driving companies to get to this level of technology. And again, I just can't stress enough how many middle market players are still operating without, this type of technology in place. And it is, call it that pain point that you asked about in the first session about, what is the pain point? Well, the pain point is companies don't feel like they have control in these positions. And so this applicant tracking system is the very first step to establish what we would consider your employer brand. So the market conditions are one piece. The next piece we would say is companies have to absolutely invest in themselves. They have to invest in their brand. And these systems do that. To be very clear to the business owners, there are many websites that when you click on the careers page, tells you to download a paper application and fill it out and send it in, which nobody does anymore. So it's this whole commitment to now, get into the digital recruiting space, the electronic recruiting space, to make it easier for the candidates to interact with your company. It's something that Luke speaks often about. It's the candidate experience. And one thing I'll share with our listeners, when I was with CST Brands, we were a convenience retailer. And 10 years ago, we built our own proprietary ATS. And 10 years ago, we had data that told us that 70% of our applicants were applying through their mobile device. And this was 10 years ago, and this was an $8.50 an hour job. And so when you fast forward 10 years, this is how candidates expect to interact with, their employment search. And so those are, from my perspective, kind of the macro, fundamental drivers is the need to do it in the marketplace. And then ultimately, yes, there's lots of efficiency gains. And I'll kind of let Luke speak to, some of the business processes that owners and companies, can automate and make more efficient. Yeah, can you touch on those few things, Luke?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, when you're talking about why do you need an ATS, it really all comes back to candidate experience. Every element you touch on comes back to candidate experience, especially in this tight labor market. We said in the last episode, it was hard to recruit before the pandemic. It's hard now. It's going to continue to be hard. All of these things we're talking about are just going to give you a competitive advantage to really manage the market that you have now. And one of the things that really comes to mind with an ATS is collaboration. Being able to collaborate with the team that is tasked with the hiring process. In some organizations, that's one person. Sometimes it's 2, 3, 4, even 5 or more people. And what I mean by that is just everybody being on the same page and being able to go into that applicant tracking system and know exactly what has been done with that candidate and what needs to be done with that candidate. So for example, the recruiter reaches out and does a phone screen, types in their notes on a particular candidate. The other recruiters or hiring managers can go into that candidate and already see exactly how that conversation went. Not only can they see how that conversation went, but they can also see where in the hiring process are they. So just really valuable, just being on the same page, not missing a beat, and being able to execute on that candidate experience the right way. And kind of to piggyback off of that, another element would be the speed and the efficiency of recruiting. I talked about workflow and the hiring process. In an applicant tracking system, you can configure your hiring process the way that you want it to be shown to everybody that is accessing the system, whether that's 3 steps, whether that's 5 steps, 20 steps. You can really customize it to the job, or you can just make it generalized across the board. And that becomes very valuable because now you start getting into the next piece, which is data. You can coordinate that data to the hiring process and start seeing how long are candidates sitting in one part of the funnel. Are they sitting in the phone screen funnel for too long? And if so, why? So you start to be able to see all these different ideas, and you can start conceptualizing on how you're going to start solving your hiring process to make it more efficient. Because there's always low-hanging fruit. There's always ways to make things better. And then the other part to the data piece is housing all of your applicant information in one place and using it as time goes on. So, for example, let's say you run an HR manager campaign 5 years ago. You have 100 applicants in total. Obviously, you're only going to select one of those persons for the job. You still have 99 folks left, but those 99 candidates were interested in your brand, in your company at one point. You have their resume, you have their email, their name, their contact information. So what I would suggest is using that data, and if that opening comes up again 5-6 years later, reach out to all of those candidates and say, hey, this great opportunity came up. If you're interested, follow the link and take a look and see if it would still be a good fit for you. So just really capitalizing on that data, pulling the right levers and making really good choices for your business. And then really the last piece I want to touch on just real quick is being able to source candidates, source talent from different channels. So, companies, a lot of the times I see different organizations using just one recruiting engine, like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn, Craigslist, whatever the case is. There's a bunch of them out there. But by using an applicant tracking system, you're able to post a job and it'll go to all of the different job boards simultaneously and funnel all of that volume back into one place. And it's pretty easy to see why that would be valuable, because you get to see which job boards are more effective than others. You get a wider net depending on your industries. There's some big efficiencies there to be gained. And so, and I think there's a lot more to it on top of this, but I think at the end of the day, an ATS is just going to allow businesses to make better decisions and improve their hiring process.
Yeah, no, those are great comments. And Paula, the other thing that I would add, some of it is kind of somewhat reiterating, what Luke said, but I want to make sure our listeners understand this, because I say it with a lot of passion, a lot of strong convictions, but in our experience, employers are leaving hires on the table, right? They're leaving money on the table. And what I mean by that is this internal process. We talked about this hiring funnel, and we are absolutely talking about the funnel itself and how quickly and accurately we move people from one stage to the next, to get that hire. And, nothing's made of wood anymore. I would knock on it, but, we haven't seen an employer yet. I'm sure they're out there, but that hasn't found incremental hires in in the low applicant flow environment that we have today, hasn't found incremental hires by executing better within that funnel. And as Luke said, that's what the visibility that these systems provide if you implement, design, and then have the discipline to execute that way over and over and over. I think we've said it in the previous session, that the quality or the volume is not what we want it to be from a hiring standpoint. And the only thing we can fix is the funnel and how we yield more. And of course, putting more on the top of that, which is a different discussion. That's a marketing discussion. But from what we have experienced, everyone has some volume and everyone can hire more of the that they have if they just focus on these fundamentals. And so that is why a lot of times folks will hear that from us a lot. It's controlling what you control, and taking advantage of what's available, and that's just a really, really big part of it. So I just can't I can't emphasize that enough.
And then Luke, was there anything that we wanted to add on the time to frame or install?
Yeah, so I think in terms of installing an applicant tracking system and kind of the things that you're looking for, I mean, it kind of goes back to what Henry mentioned. There's a ton of applicant tracking systems out there, but at the end of the day, not all of them are created equal. At the very core, of course, they perform the same service and they're going to get you the same result. But there's a lot of little nuances there with applicant tracking systems in general. So I think you really have to do your research. We don't recommend doing more than 3 to 5 ATS demos at any given time. Otherwise, you could be doing research until you're blue in the face, just because there's so many ATSs out there. And other things you want to take into consideration, time to install, making sure you have the right person there that understands the hiring process to make decisions. And then there's also the element where we talked about the brand of your company and it being on the careers page and having visibility. So there's a component where the website team has to be involved too. Let me just be very clear. It's not an expensive process. It's not, it doesn't take a lot of time. Typically we do these implementations anywhere between 1 to 3, maybe 4 weeks tops. That just really depends if the ATS is standalone, enterprise, how complex the organization is. But, it's really not that difficult. You just have to put in some time and some energy into making it happen.
And the other thing I would add to that, Paulette, again, just making sure to just emphasize certain points for the listeners, particularly, again, owner operators. These systems are very fluid. They're all per employee per month. So again, from a affordability standpoint, we think they are very affordable. No, we're not going to share pricing, but if somebody wants to reach out to us or have just a conversation, definitely give someone a better idea of the range, that they would encounter. But when you compare the cost of implementing and maybe even the cost of administration to the opportunity missed by not being staffed properly, this project would pay for itself by just, obviously hiring, more incremental hires. So I definitely, 15, 20 years ago, different story. This was kind of cutting edge technology. Only the most robust HRIS systems provided it. But now it's pretty standard. So if you're on one of the bigger platforms, you either have access to this functionality already, or you are paying for it and you're not even using it. We come across that too. And so I think ultimately we just want to dispel these notions that it's complicated, that it's expensive, that you don't have the expertise to put it in. Again, all of these cloud-based solutions, and again, we don't sell software, so we're kind of agnostic to the system. We just know that you have to have this to play and to play well. And so, our focus is just taking the client's starting point, whatever that is. So, enterprise HR system, manual payroll, right? The two extremes. Somewhere in between is the starting point, and let's just get the company to their next level of productivity. And as Luke mentioned, very easy to install. And then, once you are installed, then you'll gain the competency from the administration. Again, we do administration for a lot of our clients because there are lots of granular details that we'll say for another day that do matter. But that's certainly a good place to start. One of the other things that I want to also stress, during this conversation, as we talked a lot about applicant tracking system, Luke has mentioned, some of the functionality that you get. I tell you another really big one, and others have already figured this out, but texting and the ability to bulk text is a very, very key part of functionality from our perspective with these applicant tracking systems. And that's because texting is becoming almost the preferred mode of communication with candidates. And again, we keep very detailed metrics in all of the stuff that we do. And I guarantee you, if middle market companies kind of kept their own, sort of their own tally of phone calls they make, text messages they send, and which one gets a higher response rate, it's going to be the text messaging. And so that's kind of something that folks need to take into consideration. Some texting platforms don't offer that integrated texting. Some do, but you can only do it, one-offs, one at a time. And then, of course, there's bulk texting, which is kind of where, Luke and I like to be because of the ability to, communicate in mass. So that's just, I think, an important concept that people need to take away because, these ATS systems just allow you to get to that next step of efficiency. And so it just starts with the ATS. But then, as we get deeper into these discussions, that's the level of efficiency we think you have to get to. The only other point I want to go back and just speak to, Luke mentioned earlier that by having these systems, you can aggregate all of your own candidate, data. And for those that are listening that do post on the Zip and the Indeeds of the world, frankly know how difficult it can be to get access to that data. But again, by funneling into your environment, I want our listeners to think about, a CRM, a customer relationship management system. It's seen more in the B2B space where companies track all of their key contacts for all of their business development activity. There's a funnel, a sales funnel. That's what those systems do. I think more employers need to think about managing their applicant data in a very similar way. So instead of a CRM for business development, think of a CRM for candidate development and maintaining relationships, maintaining communication, so that, as Luke said earlier, when it comes time for you to hire, you are actively engaging that population, which, again, they've asked for consideration from your company. So it really is, I think, a great way to endorse your brand like Luke said, the candidate experience. And most importantly, there's 10,000 people that know you're trying to hire a production supervisor. And if you've got heavy concentration of applicants in your zip code, then obviously they refer and they pass things along. So it's just another area that we see developing, very aggressively. And I just think it's going to continue for now on. Companies spend so much money sponsoring jobs, getting more people to apply, but they don't. They're not intentional about making sure all of those people they paid for, all the contact information they paid for, comes onto their side of the fence, so that they can have access to it in the future. And so we're, really advocating strongly for that.
Any parting high-level considerations for the owner-operator on going to market with an ATS?
I think to me, the message is, look, if you're not doing it internally, you've really got to do it. If you need help doing it, we're here to help. There are others, that are there to help. I think the message is talent acquisition is very, very specialized. It always has been specialized, but even more so in this data-centric environment, it's even more imperative. And I would just encourage folks that are listening to think of it as an investment in getting the infrastructure in place to do more of your own sourcing, because we've seen it work. It does work. And the important thing is for owner operators to own their process and to really be intentional about recognizing that we cannot be 100% dependent on third parties anymore. Mm-hmm. Place for third parties. We need third parties. We're a third party, right? Yeah. So, but establishing this is just absolutely critical going forward. We haven't talked a lot about social media. We'll do that a little bit later, but we know these traditional job boards because we're all using them, but there's still a lot of connectivity that needs to happen in the social media space, right? We like to say that us recruiting is equal parts marketing, technology, process, and then HR for onboarding. And of course, today's discussion has been very focused on that technology bleeding into process, but you really have to do all of those pieces well to compete in today's labor market. So, that's the takeaway. Again, hopefully folks, don't feel intimidated. I don't think they should about this particular technology. And hopefully, they feel a little bit better informed and educated about, this particular space, because it's absolutely critical to any operating company.
Henry, Luke, thank you for sharing your expertise. And before we close, I want to remind everyone that upcoming episodes of Filling the Hiring Gap will be on candidate experience, efficient workflows, and key KPIs. These segments will air monthly, so please bookmark your calendar for June when we will discuss candidate experience. In the meantime, you can direct comments or questions to Henry, Luke, or myself by phone or email. Our info will be shown on the next screen. Thank you so much for joining us for this second episode of Mosaic Human Capital's Filling the Hiring Gap Lunch and Learn series. Please know we welcome your thoughts, questions, and participation in this critical conversation. Stay well, and we look forward to seeing you soon.